if you only focus on the past, no one wants to spend that money here. We can't compete against grandma. If you go so far out to the future that you disconnect from the past, then we're no different than any other new American restaurant. So we get through our 7 or 8 courses, and the old guy calls us over, and we're like, here's the comeuppance.
Yeah.
Well, boys, I didn't recognize a single thing you just served me. And he paused, and he said, but every course reminded me of my childhood.
We are lucky to be joined by Rob Connoley of Bulrush in St. Louis. And Rob, we actually met at the Squirrel Cook-Off last year.
Yeah, we sure did.
And what a unique event to meet at, first off. But, I came into that not knowing what I was going to be getting into. And then Joe Wilson, the founder of the Cook-Off, he sits me down right next to you. And what a resource to have as far as someone who knows food, knows about, restaurants and how you judge and how you score. And I mean, in my mind, you were like the most qualified judge you could find for a Squirrel Cook-Off, being that your restaurant and the concept of your restaurant is rooted in Ozark cuisine. And so that's why we're here to talk to you to learn about what that means and kind of explore some of the history of Ozark cuisine and what you're doing here with the restaurant. So I'll just say welcome to the show. And I'll ask you first, what does rooted in Ozark cuisine mean to you?
Yeah, of course I'm going to answer that, but how can we not talk about that Squirrel Cook-Off?
Yeah.
It was such a fun event. And, the deep, dark, dirty secret that Joe didn't know is I had never had squirrel before that day.
Oh, really?
I've had a lot of hunted meats, but I had never had squirrel.
Okay.
And here at the restaurant, it's kind of a joke. People who don't have exposure to hunting or even the Ozarks will assume that we do squirrel or raccoon or whatever else. And they just assume we're getting animals like that from the dumpsters in the alleys here in the city. And I have to explain to them how we source our ingredients. But I also say, look, that is a part of the Ozarks, but it's not what we're doing here. And if for no other reason we don't do it here because of health code violations and it's hard to get meats legally and stuff.
Sure.
I will say that we have done a dinner here, and it was I think it was before that cook-off, and we've all agreed we will never do it again because it was really pushing the limits of what is legally acceptable.
Okay.
And by pushing the limits, I mean it was totally illegal, but it was a blast because we trapped and hunted everything. So we had our first course was raccoon ragu.
Oh.
That was delicious. We did possum pie. So it was a fried hand pie with like a chicken pot pie filling, but it was possum. In French, I don't know if you know this, but a beaver is called a castor.
Okay.
So we did castor al pastor tacos.
Oh.
And I make my own acorn tortillas. I have ever since I lived on the Mexican border. And so we shaved the meat into the tortillas. We did pigeon pastilla. Pastilla is a Moroccan dessert that normally would have chicken. We did it with pigeon meat. Groundhog pho.
Wow.
Oh my
goodness.
It was kind of disappointing to serve venison for the entree. It's like, well, who cares?
Yeah.
We do that all the time. But I think that meal actually is a really good introduction to not what we do here at the restaurant, but conceptually what we're trying to do and how we got to where we are. To the point that, we have national, certainly, and also international recognition for what we're doing. And that is all very intentional. When I moved back to town, so I'm born and raised here, but I've been away about 18 years, maybe a little more, and I came back for family.
Mm-hmm.
And I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do for my next restaurant. My last one was a locavore foraged food restaurant because I was in Apache territory in southern New Mexico And indigenous people trained me how to forage year round because their Apaches weren't migratory. They're pretty stationary. They move a little for hunting, but it's not like other tribes. They'll travel quite a bit. And so they taught me how to recognize the same plants in January, May, August, and November. And you really get a connection to the land and the plants. Well, that was the last restaurant. And having that connection to the land, which really was just an extension of my childhood and being out in the woods. Coming here, I was trying to figure out what's next. And so often people say, do what you know and what you love, of course. We should all do that if we can make a living doing it. But the other thing for me in particular was looking at the food of my childhood. Like, food's such an important part of me, so how did I get here?
Right.
And even the quirkiness of why fine dining. I mean, people don't think of Ozarks and fine dining.
Yeah, that's traditionally not something that your mind goes straight to. It's
No,
like,
especially when I sit here and say, well, we did possum pie. you
right.
know?
Well, and the Ozarks were traditionally and historically a very poor place.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's poor, and it's very much about self-sufficiency, living off the land, using every last drop of everything you can, which is a huge part of the restaurant here. We call ourselves a zero-waste restaurant because literally food never goes in the trash. At worst, it'll go into compost. That compost to us is a failure. Anyway, I'm going to go down so many paths. You're just going to have to wrangle me in to get questions answered. But when I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do, at some point, my spouse was doing work with churches in the Ozarks. And I said, you know what? Ask the little old church ladies for the church cookbook. Maybe there's something there. I didn't know. And I've got this huge stack now of Ozark church cookbooks. To be honest, they're all pretty much crap. But I learned a lot about how those books came into being. There's a history to it. It's not just random. There are actually two companies out of Kansas that were marketing services that led to the creation of these books. And that's why there's duplicated recipes in different churches' books. But what's fun about the Ozark books versus maybe up here in St. Louis is every other woman who's named for a recipe is like Eula May and Ella Jean. I'm like, okay, well, there's some Ozarkness happening here. But when I realized that was not the quality that I needed, then I thought, well, my family's all from St. Genevieve since the 1830s.
Okay.
I thought, well, that could be kind of interesting. But I didn't want to dig into German food. I mean, I love German food. Give me a sausage and a bowl of potatoes, and I'm good. That's my deathbed meal. But I didn't want to do a restaurant based on that. That's
Sure.
in 2019 when we opened. That's a little too heavy. I wasn't the one to take on that project, and quite frankly, I don't really sit in my German heritage that much anyway. But someone at some point said, you should go down to Springfield to the public library. They have an Ozark cookbook collection. Well, that's interesting. I never thought about an Ozark cookbook collection like that. There are books specific to it. But of course there are. There are for every place. But at that point, I wasn't aware of it. And I went, and these amazing rare cookbooks, I ended up buying every single one of them literally that day before I left the library on Amazon or eBay. Nothing cost me more than $5.
Yeah.
Now, some of the listeners will know almost every one of those books was written for tourists.
Okay.
This is all kind of the continuation of Shepherd of the Hills. Okay, Shepherd of the Hills. Everyone has their perspective on it. My understanding of it, as I've studied it, is the dude went down there to convalesce, to heal. He fell in love with this exotic area, but as he was writing these letters back east, that ultimately became the book. There are people who read that who had not been to the Ozarks, who saw this negative connotation of the barefoot, uneducated, what we now call hillbillies.
Right.
This is the origin of the hillbillies. And so, all this does tie together. So stick with me here.
Oh, we're rocking with you.
Fantastic.
You're doing great.
Because I've got years of thinking about why people had never done Ozark cuisine as something held out to be special to the world.
Right.
I'm not talking about the small town Ozark restaurants. Of course that's there. So Shepherd of the Hills happens, and we have the later variations. So old timers will remember Lil Abner, the cartoon.
Yeah.
That's the hillbilly culture that starts with that. Most people will argue Beverly Hillbillies. More modern times, certainly we have Jason Bateman in the Ozarks and Winter's Bone. Okay, I say all those because I've done so many presentations down in the Ozarks, and I always start with 2 questions. First question, give me one positive portrayal of the Ozarks in mass media or pop culture. And it's silence. People say, oh, well, my cousin. No. Mass media, pop culture.
Right.
How does the world perceive us? I have yet to have an answer. Now, some people will astutely say, well, when Anthony Bourdain came down and, that was a fun episode. He almost killed the guy, but it was a fun episode.
I don't think I saw that. Where did he come to?
I don't remember. Somewhere. They ended up doing raccoon hunting and gig fishing.
Okay.
And on the gig fishing, he had the author of, maybe it was Winter's Bone, I don't know, a famous author, though, who got hit maybe by a tree and almost fell off the skid boat or something.
Oh, my goodness.
it was very dramatic, great TV. And I thought it was a fair presentation of the Ozarks. I'm sure people would nitpick it, but compared to everything else I've just listed. Okay, so we have that negative stuff that the world has. And then my second question is, what is Ozark food? Almost always the answer is, well, living off the land, gardening, my grandma used to can. I'm like, yeah, these are all examples, but what is it? Versus if I said, well, what's Cajun food? You can tell me that.
Yeah.
You can tell me how that came into existence, into being. And so as I'm trying to figure out what I want to do, at some point I made the terrible mistake of typing into Google, what is Ozark cuisine? Now, whoever would say cuisine with Ozark food?
Yeah, to even say that is kind of weird.
I'm a fine dining guy. That's the word that came out of my mouth, into my fingers, and only one thing popped up. And it was an article in Vice.com, I'm guessing from maybe 10 years ago now, and the title is, Why You Don't Know About Ozark Cuisine. And it talks about isolationism and racism in the Ozarks. I thought, well, yeah, that exists, but that's not the Ozarks. That exists everywhere. And so very quickly, I realized here's an opportunity to describe the Ozarks to people who don't know the Ozarks. The people in the Ozarks know it. And then when they come to my restaurant, they're like, well, my grandma's collard greens are better than that. Or she wouldn't even serve collard. She'd serve poke. I'm like, I know. But I'm trying to make a living too. And I'm trying to engage people in a way that they can get the message. If I sit in a lecture here in St. Louis, which I do from time to time, and I try to explain what Ozark cuisine is, I can see the eyes glaze. Now, it's not because I'm that boring of a speaker, but, just talking is not easy to make that exciting. But if I put a plate of food in front of you and give you a little snippet of information, and it could be about anything. On our current menu, we're talking about a lot about the Livestock Conservancy and their role in preserving livestock in the country. And because of that, I talk a lot about the specific breeds that were the first ones, as far as we can tell, to be brought into the Ozarks. That's kind of interesting.
Right.
And it gives people a different perspective, because now, after 20 minutes of diatribe, I can get to the answer to your question. When we try to define what it means to be rooted in Ozark cuisine, I don't want to be literal about it. That's boring.
Yeah.
I don't want to be stuck in 1820s, although that's where we focus our time. We're essentially pre-1870. There's wiggle room.
Okay.
I should say 1790 to 1870. That's our sweet spot.
Okay. And that's where you're kind of building off of and looking back to be inspired by dishes.
That's right.
Okay.
And we choose that period because I look at what's being eaten in the Ozarks today and in my lifetime, and I try to figure out where that came from. And so when we first opened, people immediately would say, well, what about indigenous people? They've been here for millennia. I'm like, yes, they have. But the food we eat today is the merging, the synergy between those indigenous people, the settlers who came into the area, and oftentimes enslaved people that the settlers brought. Those three cultures have their own distinct contributions that come into the mix to become one. Each of those also has subcultures and smaller split-offs. So, we could talk about the Osage people, and we can talk about the Cherokee people. We can talk about the Trail of Tears and anyone who is part of that trail. With enslaved people, we can talk about people who came up the Mississippi, people who came up the Arkansas, what part of Africa they came from, or did they come from the Caribbean if they were later. And then, of course, with settlers, well, I still need to get to Swedenborg, Missouri and find out what that's about. Because yes, we have the Germans, yes, we have the Scots, but we also have the Irish, the French. Everything's down there, and they all have contributions. And if we tease out the food with enough diligence, we can see all those. That's what's fascinating to me, because when we go back to that, what I call the origin story, which of course, again, indigenous people were before, but I think that's a really fascinating way of viewing the culture of the Ozarks. Instead of just saying today, let's say, well, let's go back. I'm going to say one more thing, and then I can take a breath and let you poke me in a different direction. So Springfield Library, the staff there said, well, I think you need to go down to Fayetteville. Fayetteville at the university has a rare book collection. In the rare book collection, they have an Ozark section, and in the Ozark section, they have a cookbook set. They also have all that back to the land stuff, which is fascinating to me that I would love to delve into. I just haven't had time. And quite frankly, the bittersweet database is solid. For people who don't know bittersweet, that's the Ozark equivalent to Firefox, which is the Appalachian version of old-timers who shared their wisdom of how to survive back when they homesteaded.
Okay.
Bittersweet is great because it's a completely digital database. And so if you Google Bittersweet Ozark, it'll pop right up, and you'll find out how people made their pone, or how they skinned their deer, or that's where I really learned how to do old-timey nixtamalization of corn. Because, we have cal and lime now. We can do it much more scientifically.
Right.
But, of course, they were using wood ash. And which wood was the best, and all that stuff. Anyway, so I go to Fayetteville, look at their cookbooks. Same thing. I buy every single one of them. Nothing cost me more than $10, and now I'm the world's authority on Ozark cookbooks. They're all on the shelf right back there, and here in my restaurant. And there's one book I didn't get. It seems to be the absolute oldest cookbook from the Ozarks, and it's called Chikora's Help for the Housekeeper. Now, this makes sense because all those other books, again, are spin-offs of the tourism industry that goes back to Shepherd of the Hills. Chikora precedes all that, and this is some rich lady who had housekeepers and had to teach the housekeepers how to take care of things. There's a whole genre of these books. You can find, I don't know, maybe 20 or 30 different ones around the country that's all the same idea. Nothing really earth-shattering was in there, but it's good to know, like, what was the first.
Right.
That archivist, though, said you need to get over to Little Rock and go to the Butler Center for Arkansas Studies. So for people who don't know me, since we haven't even introduced me really, so I have a doctorate. My doctorate's in nothing relevant. It's sports psychology from Purdue.
Really? Completely different.
Completely different. This is my third career cooking. But it makes sense where I got to today because of career 1 and 2. I love research, and I love geeking out on finding historical things. But back in high school, I was bad at history. Did not like it. Why do I need to learn a list of generals and wars but make it relevant,
right?
And give me culture and food. Yeah, I'm down for that.
About that.
And so I go to the Butler Center, and in their archive, I hope their lead archivist is not listening right now. I went during lunch hour, which meant I got the work study student.
Okay.
This was the best thing that could have happened to me, and the worst thing for archivists around the world, because I went in and I said, hey, I'm a chef. I'm thinking about opening a restaurant. I'm looking at Ozark food, and I think it might be interesting to look at some old documents. And the student went in back and started pulling out boxes. Now, if anyone has been to an archive before, you don't get boxes. You get a page at a time on an empty table. You're only allowed a pencil with an eraser. Some don't even let you have your cell phone because they're afraid of the flash. It's all about protecting the documents.
Right.
I got boxes and I'm just flipping through them. I don't know any better.
The work study student was like, "What?
Here
Here's
you
everything
go.
I have."
Here you go. By the way, hurry up before the archivist gets back.
Yeah.
I don't think they knew they were doing anything wrong. And I got through 3 or 4 boxes, and there's one letter in particular. There's a whole bunch of golden gems that I got my hands on, but one in particular. It's some dude, 1820, came from Boston, got to the area, writes home to mom. Mom, I'm okay. I killed a deer. I've met the neighbors. I'm going to be fine. And I thought, wow, wouldn't it be amazing to tell this story, not from the textbook perspective, but the average person.
Right.
Not the famous person. I don't care about them. The average person. Like, how did they get there? How did they survive what they eat? So with that as the starting point to the answer to the question, I started looking for all this stuff that fit that bill. Letters, journals, scrapbooks. We found family scrapbooks that would cover like 20-year period, and it'd say what they traded with their neighbor, what they pulled out of the garden. There's one of my favorites was this recipe. I'm like, what the hell is this? And I go through and it's got all these animal and plant products, and at some point it says blackening. I'm like, what is this? To my chefy mind, I'm like, is that like a Caribbean thing? Because there's a black cake, and that basically means burnt sugar. And my research of last resort is always throwing things on Facebook. I'm like, hey, anybody know what the heck this is?
Just throwing it out to the masses, crowdsource.
Because you know you're going to get 99% just stuff that's like stupid.
Garbage.
That's stupid. You know, that's not the right way of saying that. But so people started responding with things that were not as useful. And then someone said, that's shoe polish. Like, what? Shoe polish?
Really?
They had a recipe for shoe polish. Well, of course they did.
Yeah, they would have had to made it somehow.
They weren't buying it yet.
Right.
So all these little gems. Now, people have this misconception that we have all these recipes. We do have a bunch of recipes. I forwarded a link to you, and I share it with the world. It's a Google Doc. Anyone can look at it, and it's the summary. It's not even the summary. It's the gathering of all my research in one document. And it's broken up by important people, important websites, important books, and recipes. Same with my bibliography. I share these freely because people shared them with me. And so in there's a bunch of recipes, and I've made all of them. There's a lot of chow chow, a lot of cornbread, a lot of fruitcake, a lot of peach pickle, a lot of the standard stuff that we would expect in the Ozarks. And it all depends on what part of the Ozarks I was in, whether Springfield or the Boot Hill in Missouri. And none of those are recipes I want to make today. I do a fruitcake every year because it's fun to say, hey, this is a 1864 fruitcake, and I can stay pretty true to it. But our cooking knowledge has changed. It's not just when they say a slow heat, they mean 325, or sour milk, buttermilk. You know, it's not just those translations. Those are pretty easy. It's our ovens are different. Our stoves are different. Our ingredients are different. The flour that they talk about is not the flour we talk about. Indian meal, which is, of course is cornmeal. Yeah, there's just a lot of stuff in those translations and transliterations of the recipes. So here's the answer in 30 seconds. Wow, I wore myself out on that. When we say rooted in Ozark cuisine, I say don't be literal. We're taking these inspirations and creating food that contemporary, modern people want to eat.
Right.
And to do that, my techniques are a little bit different than what you would expect. Sometimes my ingredients are a little bit different, but the root is there, the core is there. What I say to my staff every time I have a new kitchen person, I say, look, if you only focus on the past, no one wants to spend that money here. We can't compete against grandma. If you go so far out to the future that you disconnect from the past, then we're no different than any other new American restaurant.
Right.
Just like a diner.
Yeah, there's this genre of new American. Everyone's new American. Who cares? The sweet spot and the magic for us and why we've done so well here is we're cooking for a contemporary diet, but always anchored to the past, always telling that story. And I'll end that answer with this one interaction that was, to this day, it's still the best thing anyone's ever said to me. We had a guy come in for his law school graduation. This is the first year we were open. We had only been open 2 months. He brought Grandpa in. Grandpa, lifelong Ozarkian, 92 years old. As soon as the grandson told me who he was, my sous chef and I looked at each other and went, oh, shit. We're busted. Because we were totally in the fake it till you make it phase. We didn't know what we were doing. We were trying to figure it out.
You're kind of exploring a concept and proving it to yourself along the way.
Yeah. We knew the food would be good. That wasn't the question, but to have the concept work.
Right.
Okay, so we get through our 7 or 8 courses, and the old guy calls us over, and we're like, here's the comeuppance.
Here we go.
and we walked over, and he said, well, boys, I didn't recognize a single thing you just served me. And he paused, and he said, but every course reminded me of my childhood. Come on.
No, you nailed it.
Come on. You can't give me a better compliment than that.
Yeah.
That is rooted in Ozark cuisine.
I love it.
Should we introduce Chef Connoley too, with some of the accolades where we're sitting?
Yeah,
we mentioned it before, but
yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so we have chef, and now I also just learned doctorate in sports.
Yep.
Sports what?
Sports psychology.
Sports psychology. Well, this doesn't matter for a restaurant really, but it could for research.
Yeah.
So Chef Rob Connoley at Bulrush Restaurant in St. Louis, and you are a 4 times James Beard Award semifinalist.
Yeah, as of this year, it's our fourth award.
And what is, for anyone who doesn't know what that is, what is the James Beard?
So the colloquial saying is it's the Academy Awards or the Oscars of the restaurant industry. It's the highest you can get in the United States. There are people who talk about Michelin, but Michelin's only in select cities. James Beard is the entire U.S. And so this is, it's the top honor. And there's 3 stages, semifinalist, finalist, and winner. Fingers crossed that this year Ozark Cuisine gets its due and brings us along for the ride.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Absolutely.
So that's the quick intro. Now we can jump into the questions.
For sure. And even still, just on top of that, coming in here, we mentioned it's high end, but it's not just high end. It's like, this is top of the line stuff. You're saying, people don't associate Ozark food with high-end restaurant. It's exactly what you think when you think fine dining. It's introduced to you. You're talking about each dish as it comes out.
It's intimate.
It's intimate. You're explaining it. Very cool experience. We were here last night and got to see it all, and appreciate you opening up the restaurant to us. But very cool. I want to dive into, we were talking about some history and the different types of people who were here and kind of that mix of slaves and early white settlers with Indians who had been here and they were native. What were some of the traditional and historical ways to prepare food, harvest food in that time frame of, you said 1790 to 1870? Is that right?
Yeah, we'd say late 18th, early 19th century.
Okay.
And I used to say pre-industrial revolution. And the only reason I said that is industrial revolution brought trains. And with trains, we had newspapers from back east. And we saw that in that archival work. All of a sudden, about 1860, 1870, I see paper clippings in with the archives. I'm like, well, shoot, there goes that purity. Not that it was ever a purity test, but it really got tainted. And things like Boston brown bread. Like, okay, well, a lot of recipes for Boston brown bread. But it was only about that 1860, 1870 that it starts inundating. And now at that point, well, might as well have 7-layer salad and jello salad because it's all the same going back to those church cookbooks.
Yeah. When you go back to that time frame and you look at like the ways that meals were harvested, as far as like wild game and hunting and gathering, foraging, how those were done then, and I'd like to hear your thoughts on taking that from at a point in time it was all about survival, right? And we, of course, as humans, we always eat to survive and have enough energy to go on to the next day. But back then it was you had to go out and get your own food, gather, hunt, whatever it took to eat and make it to the next day. And then at some point along the way, as we industrialized, food became less and less about survival, and we wanted to make it taste good, and there was creativity involved. And maybe that creativity goes all the way back to the very beginning. So I'm curious. I'd just love to hear your take on the way that things were prepared back then, and when they started morphing into less about survival, more about like, let's enjoy this food, let's make it taste how we want to, and be a little bit creative with it.
Yeah, and you're asking a question that is really hard to answer because it was survival times. And so why would they write about it? But there's some windows that show us things. There's a whole genre of books that we don't really use here at the restaurant, but I'm very aware of them. And it's the genre that is like, I was held captive by the Indians for 10 years. And so it's a settler's perspective on how the indigenous people were living. And there'll be a lot of details about what they were cooking, how they were cooking, because that's an outside observer,
Right.
And writing 10 years later, 15 years later. What we see, though, in these letters is never specifics. I hunted a deer, I got some fish. Why would they say anything more?
They're not writing down recipes.
No, we really don't see recipes till much later. And even then, one of the stories I tell at the restaurant is corn pone is a great example. So corn pone is just corn mush fried up.
Okay.
Typically in a skillet, typically with lard, bacon fat, whatever.
Is it a cornbread type?
Well, so it starts off as just corn mush, cornmeal, water, and deep fried.
Okay.
And it's hard, it's dry, it's not the most exciting thing to eat. But back then, it would have been great. And then I may get the date wrong, so someone can write in and say I'm wrong. But I think it was about 1840, 1841, baking powder was released as a commercial product. So baking powder had been there, but as the chemical. And then it gets packaged and marketed. As soon as that happens, all of a sudden we see all these recipes that use baking powder. It makes sense if you want to sell baking powder, you got to tell people how to use it.
Right.
And so all of a sudden we see corn pone kind of fade away. Oh, yes, people still eat it, but not like they used to.
Okay.
And cornbread comes into existence.
Okay.
Because we've leavened that corn pone. It's those little details that are the answer to your question, because we don't have anything more than that. That back to the land movement, I think, is really important to the answer, though. And again, I wish I had spent more time on that. But the restaurant, I only have so many hours. But that whole genre of writing, which is about the back to the landers, these are the anti-establishment hippies of the late 60s, early 70s. They were leaving the big cities because of the Vietnam War. Many of them ended up in northern Arkansas, but they spread all over the country, but they wanted to be in rural areas. When they got there, who did they reach out to find out how to live? The old-timers. And here's why that's fascinating to me. An old-timer in 1970 was very likely born in the 19th century.
Right.
That's pre-Shepherd of the Hills. That's pre a lot of technology. And so the wisdom that they're sharing is that original stuff. That's the OG as far as we're able to get. I work with the Osage Nation. They have an Office of Historic Preservation, and Dr. Andrea Hunter has been very gracious to share her dissertation with me. So I see what the Osage people were eating back in the 18th century and before, but we don't see the details. We don't see how they cooked it. They probably had a fire and threw it on the fire. Maybe they made a pot and threw it in the pot. But we don't get any more detail than that. So As far as I know, I've not seen any significant. Again. I I live in a world, because I don't do this full time, the research full time. I live in a world where people are constantly updating me, which
Right.
is great.
Yeah.
It's great. I want to be accurate. As far as I know, no one has done the deep research on food in the Ozarks and how it was prepared. Um, and so I'm saying that thinking right now about Cane Hill, Arkansas, and that archaeologic dig, and I'm like, oh, I probably need to go back, because they
There
probably
anything
have
there?
a lot more information now than they did when I was there 3 years ago.
Yeah. Well, and I know I was looking through the document you sent me with some of the historic recipes and some of the stories that you had. And I noticed in there you mentioned Dr. Blevins a lot,
Yeah.
who we just had on and we interviewed talking about the history of the Ozarks, which is just a fascinating topic in itself, because the main thing that stuck out to me from that interview was the Ozarks is the concept of the Ozarks is actually a relatively new concept. The place has always been here,
Yeah.
but people didn't start identifying with the Ozark image until really the last 100 years, which is just a blip in history. And so I bring that up because I was looking through your document, and you've even gone back in some of your research through a historian's perspective and going through Dr. Blevins' research and his work and trying to pull out what little bit exists within the journals and the personal accounts that are in the history that we have. And I can see that you're trying to grab from a lot of different places because it isn't really readily available.
Well, and Brooks is funny you should bring him up, because he is the researcher right now. I mean, there have been others in the past, obviously, and there's many people who do, but he is the big name right now.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I reached out to him early on, I asked him about food, and he would send me tidbits here and there. And at one point he said, here's the thing. No one's done this work. He said, I would know, because if anyone would have done it, it would have been me.
Yeah.
And he said, I haven't done it. And he just sent me all this database of notes from his field notes that he just hadn't done anything with, because that's not his area of interest. It's rife for someone to jump in and do it. Like, sure, I could do it if I didn't have a restaurant, but
Right.
I can't do that.
Yeah.
And so, hopefully some grad student right now is trying to figure out what their thesis is going to be, and they say this is what it is. From my perspective, though, because I come from academia and I have a tainted perspective, almost a disdain of academia. Well, let me answer it. Let me tell you this. So I had this doctor, MD doctor in. She was a surgeon, is a surgeon. And at the end of the meal, she said, so how does it feel to know that your research just disappears at the end of every night? Now, she may have caught me on an off night, but I took that as pretty condescending, whether she intended it that way. And she didn't know my background. She didn't know I have a doctorate. She didn't know I was trying to do truly rigorous academic research. And so I snapped at her, which it's a prepaid meal, so I guess it's okay. She had already tipped us.
Tips included, yeah.
And I said, well, how does it feel to write for medical journals that no one reads just to build your CV? I said, for me, I'm touching people every single night of my life. And this is where I want to go with that is, to me, the concept of citizen scientist is really important. For people who don't know, it's the idea that every one of us can be a scientist. Doesn't mean we're publishing articles, doesn't mean we're doing chemical testing. The best example that most people know of is the annual bird count. That's citizen science at its greatest. Random people go out there, we teach them some basics, and they document the birds. That comes back to the trained scientists who then do the work. That idea with Ozarks makes so much sense because so few people can answer what is Ozark cuisine.
Yeah.
Can give me a positive answer to give me a positive portrayal of the Ozarks. People don't know this area. And I don't know if you heard yourself, you said the concept is 100 years old. it ties back to Shepherd of the Hills.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, all this stuff comes back together. And what's nice about the Ozarks is it's a very defined region. The culture is a little more squishy.
Right.
And even as I say, it's a defined region. I know Smithsonian brought in the map this year, even last year, and there are people who will argue Illinois and whatever. But generally, it's a pretty defined area. It would be easy for someone to really dig in deep. And you know the project I've wanted to do, I'm saying this to that grad student who's listening.
Yeah.
This gets back to all those subcultures that I haven't gotten to, the Swedenborgs. What is this? Is every county has a historical society. Man, I would love to do that archive work I did in Little Rock and Fayetteville in each county.
Each county of the Ozarks.
And learn that very
yeah.
specific
Yeah.
culture. That would just be, it's like I did the fried pie tour because I was like, well, I better learn about fried pies on a deeper level. And I did the loop in Eureka Springs and whatever. And then I hit the chocolate rolls. Like, what is this?
Where did you run into those?
Oh, I knew you were going to ask that. Someone will tell you. It was in north central Arkansas. They do a chocolate roll festival. It really ties to one specific woman who did pass away during the first year of COVID or second year of COVID.
Okay.
So I don't know how that town's fared with that since. But it's kind of just this soft dough filled with chocolate.
Oh, man.
Is it special? Is it great? Yeah, to the town it is.
Yeah.
But to the culture, it's huge. Not just the tourism culture. Like, that is what that town identifies with. Every town's got that.
I mean, by town, you're even looking at different histories of people groups moving in, and you have historically German towns and Irish towns and English towns, and as far as they were, you know, as they're going frontier, how that looks different as they're moving west. All of that is endlessly fascinating to me as you're thinking dishes and food and the some of the writings, even some of the research. I was just thinking it's probably hard to track because so many people just passed it on. It was never actually written down. It's you watch grandma cook and mom cook and dad field dress, and then you keep doing it. And
yes, let me give you a very clear example of that. Brown bread that I already mentioned.
The Boston brown bread.
Yeah. You can see in the recipes how that clearly was an oral tradition that ultimately got written down. Because we have 3 categories of ingredients: dry, wet, spice. 3 ingredients in each. Each of those is the same volume. 1 cup rye, 1 cup cornmeal, 1 cup flour. You can see how easy that would be to remember. And so why would we write that down?
Yeah.
You know, and there's other examples like that. I also want to mention, though, think about all the gems that are hidden in these towns. I was in Shannondale, which is north of Eminence, which is like, that's core, right? That's core Ozark from Missouri. And Shannondale specifically is essentially a church camp, and there's an office that's like Department of Conservation, I think, or maybe Game and Fish. I don't remember, but it's a state office. And I was walking through looking at all their displays and their taxidermy and whatever, and on the wall was an article from who knows when, I'm going to say 1940s, but I don't remember, about eel. Like, what?
Eel.
Stop the train.
Yeah.
Eel. And eel are native to Missouri. And we only don't know about eel now, well, and I should say Arkansas too. We don't know about them now because once the dams went up in the rivers, the eel can't do their thing. For people who don't know, eel, they start down in the Gulf area and they migrate up. The females migrate up. And then the males stay down there just chilling until the ladies come back. And
It's a big girls' trip.
Yeah,
Up
so when the dams happened, they couldn't get back up. So there's some eel now, but not like there used to be. It used to be a regular food source. I only know this because of some framed yellowed piece of paper in that government office in Shannondale, Missouri.
Yeah.
And so you better believe I put that on the menu as soon as I could.
Oh, yeah. You have to.
Yeah, because no one knows that. And there's people right now typing away to your email saying, I knew that. But most people don't know that there's eel. That's because we don't really have them out there now, and certainly no one's selling them.
Yeah, absolutely. Food is a big part of culture and the way that people identify with who they are and where they come from. And I want to kind of move into the culture of the Ozarks and food as it's represented here, at least in people's opinions. Maybe not necessarily your restaurant, but when you think about Ozark cuisine, do you feel like, and I'm asking this question back again to our interview with Dr. Blevins, we had a big conversation around, is the Ozarks in the South? Is it a Southern culture, represented in the different towns and places? And my question to you now is kind of tied back to that. Would you consider Ozark cuisine a Southern culture of food, or is it more of a Midwestern, or is it a completely unique thing in its own?
Yeah. It's an unanswerable question, and I can also answer it in 20 different ways.
Okay.
I would say, so part of it is what part of the Ozarks,
Sure.
I find Arkansas to be more southern than the Missouri Ozarks. I don't know about this Kansas and Oklahoma and Illinois stuff.
The edges.
They're just little blips. No offense to the people living in the blips. The other part, though, is I do think it's more Midwest in that it's more pragmatic, sustainable food versus the South, I think of as more about hospitality, celebration. Not that we don't do that here, but the resources were different here at the origin. And so I don't know, everything that I see in the history is about just surviving.
Mhm.
And when I look at Southern food, that's not it. That's not what they celebrate. So, my short answer, if I could give one, is it's more Midwest.
You would say Midwestern.
Yeah.
Is that because in the South you have established ports and trade and people, and in the West and even Midwest you have people who are moving west to survive, and so food isn't about hospitality or even a show of wealth or anything like that. It's just, what can I get out of the land immediately to push me on to the next day?
Yeah, I think there's some truth to that because we're the end of the journey, not the beginning of the journey. People aren't coming here to get something; they're coming here to be here, and so that's a long-term game. I don't know. I think we're dancing around the same idea, but even more so, I feel like people in Arkansas would probably disagree with me. I'm not talking about who's serving more grits. That's not what I'm talking about.
Right.
I'm talking about the culture around food. And I do think even in northern Arkansas, it's still more about sustainability, sustenance, and just living.
So the culture around food in the Ozarks is more about living.
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
I think
Never thought about that before.
I hadn't either, because I typically jump to like kind of what you said. Who serves more grits? Who's making the fried chicken? Who's serving collard greens? Even like we talked about in the hotel room, like salmon patties. This is like a very Southern dish, and there's reasons behind that, which I want to kind of maybe talk about here in a minute. But yeah, I don't ever think about the way that the food is presented and why and what the meaning behind it is necessarily. I more go to like the actual, what is the food and how fried is it?
It's what you eat before you go hunt, or what you eat when you come home from a day of farming.
Yeah.
To get through to the next day, kind of deal.
Yeah.
It's energy. It's like when I do that fruitcake every year. I love telling people how the recipes are always for 30 pounds of fruitcake. They're like, what? And I
So
say,
much.
and I say, it's not because they have that many friends that they want to give fruitcake to. It's because this is actually energy for the winter. Think about when you make the fruitcake. You've got your nuts, you've dried your fruits at this point, and this is how you're going to preserve them to get through the winter.
Yeah, it's not just for Christmas celebration.
It's not to
Right.
wrap with a bow and
Yeah.
give a 1 pound fruitcake to 30 friends. That's not what it's about.
Is fruitcake, is that a more Southern thing, or is that unique to the Ozarks?
No, that's universal.
Okay.
That's
I
universal.
wasn't
And I don't even see ingredients in those old recipes. I've got a bunch of them for fruitcake. I don't see things that are specific to the Ozarks. I
Okay.
never see pawpaw worked in, which would make sense because that just becomes mush. No one lists black walnut, for example. And to be honest, I don't know when black walnut if they're native or if they're introduced. I don't even know that. There's nothing in those recipes that you don't find elsewhere. And in fact, you see things that you can tell were bought at the general store,
Right.
Mm.
you know?
Yeah.
So the culture around Ozark food is survival at the base.
I think so. Doesn't mean we don't celebrate,
Totally.
but I think it's instilled in us. And to me, that's why I just think about, forget food for a second, the Midwest culture. At least to my family, it's about hard work,
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
determination. Pull yourself up by the bootstraps. If you're going to make it, it's going to be at your own hard work. And maybe that's just my German heritage. I don't know.
Yeah. And it is funny because I'm sure if we asked someone who was in Little Rock and they were a chef and their family had that background, they may have a different take on it
Yeah.
because they're like, well, I identify more Southern. So that's the part about it. Like you said, culturally, the boundaries are a little bit more squishy because everyone has their own experience and their own history, where their families come from or what they hold dear and near. So it's a very hard question to answer. And
Yeah.
I appreciate you taking the attempt to do it for us.
Well, I think I'm also tainted because I'm looking at the 19th century.
Mm-hmm.
That's very different than people looking at 2024.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if I go down to, let's pick a random city. If I go to Rolla, how do they identify? I don't know. I still think based on the restaurants I've eaten down there that they would identify as Midwest.
Mm-hmm.
But then the answer becomes more shallow. I think it's, well, we don't serve as much grits down here.
Right.
But that's not, to me, that's not the question. Who cares? I mean, I can go to New York City and eat at 10 Southern restaurants.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
I can go up to Chicago and do this. You know, it's like, what does it mean to be Southern or Midwestern?
Yeah. No,
And
you're right.
to me, that's a much deeper question.
Absolutely. I was doing something recently and I came across someone saying like, oh, the salmon patty is a very Southern recipe. And just this all going back to culturally how this all ties in. And I was like, oh, that's kind of weird because like we don't have salmon in the South. Like, where does that come from? And they were talking about back in the Great Depression, it dates back to the Great Depression where the rural South was one of the most affected areas of the Great Depression. So people were so poor that their diets were very unbalanced. They could only afford, the ground cornmeal and flour-based dishes and stuff like that. And so people were developing what's called pellagra, which shows up as a skin disease. It's red lesions. It's on your chest and it's on your neck. And it would show on your neck, and that's where the term redneck comes from.
Huh.
And so the government realized that this was based off of a poor diet, and so they started subsidizing canned salmon production in Alaska so that poor people could buy meat and fish and balance their diet overall, and so that they could buy back then it was like less than a nickel to buy a can of salmon, and so people were grinding up crackers, adding an egg, and frying it up, and that was the salmon patty, and that's why we have it today. And I grew up eating salmon patties, and I was like, oh my gosh, like that all makes so much sense, and I never knew it. And then it ties back to me for like, that's some of those things are why I identify as Southern or Midwestern and some of the history. So I bring that up just to say it's some of those things can kind of open up who you are and where you come from if you know those things.
So if you were raised on them, does that mean you're not a redneck?
Maybe so, because I would have had a more balanced diet. That's a good question.
I just want to know how you use your research and your understanding of food and the concept of how we eat food and process food and find food and all that kind of stuff in Bulrush.
Yeah. So when we come up with a new dish, and we do 2 new courses every single week, so we average 100 courses a year. We don't have recipes. So, here we are at 5 years. We've got 400 to 500 recipes that we've made. Not recipes, but dishes that we've made. And I've had a few different staff over the years. I've got a pretty stable staff, but still, when they come on new, I have to explain how this works because most restaurants, here's the binder, do that recipe. And we just don't have that here. And so what precedes even the concept is our local sourcing.
Hmm.
Nothing is more important to me than supporting local farmers, local 4-H kids, whatever. I want the freshest, the best ingredients. And And you'll see that in all of our dishes. Even though they may seem goofy, like last night in dinner, we served a chili garlic crisp. That's a very Chinese thing,
Mm-hmm.
but that was almost exclusively locally sourced. So, okay, so with that framework, when we're ready to do a new dish, the first thing we think about is what are the farmers bringing us? Right now, the farmers aren't bringing anything, right? I mean, we're in the dead of winter. We're not even getting the hardy greens anymore, so no more collards or kale. There's a few things that they've cellared, so there's a few squash and pumpkins still coming in, not many. And so we focus a lot more on our proteins because we can get those year round. We do more with nuts with our meals. So cornmeal is more prevalent on the current menu. And what I do with my team is I say, okay, here's what the farmers have, come up with ideas. And I'm not the type of chef who says, here are the dishes we're creating. I do have many ideas I throw out there, but I want them to do it because I think it makes it a more interesting restaurant.
Mm-hmm.
And so they'll come back and say, I'm interested in doing this dish. My job as the chef then is to develop the concept to be appropriate for a tasting menu, which there's a lot of layers to that, which we don't need to get into, but it has to do with flow of flavors and textures and what story are we telling through our food. And then the more important one is, how is this Ozarks?
Mm-hmm.
We've done pasta a few times, and pasta is a hard sell for me. My guys love making pasta, and they know that I hate serving pasta because it's not a strong story in the Ozarks. It doesn't mean pasta doesn't exist in the Ozarks, but when we look at 19th century Ozarks, we don't see pasta at all. Now, I'm not saying it wasn't there. There's always someone who will write in and say it was.
Sure.
I never found it in any of my research. And our rule of thumb is if we don't see it from a first-person account being consumed in the 19th century, we don't serve it.
So when your staff comes to you with a pasta dish, they know that they're going up against it's an uphill battle.
It's an uphill battle. And we're doing a gnocchi right now.
Okay.
It is delicious. Like, give me a huge bowl of this gnocchi. It's got an apple cider reduction for the sauce. Mm-hmm. The finishing touch, the fanciness of it is we do a smoked, I think it's a persimmon wood smoked cured egg yolk, local chicken eggs, fine. And he said pork. Like, okay, I can literally and metaphorically sink my teeth into that. And that was good because we had just bought a mule-foot hog from a local farmer. We buy mule-foot hogs when we need lard, and so we got it, and that opened up the stories for me because it allowed me to tell the story of the history of pork in the Ozarks. Again, 19th century stuff. So the concept is more important, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the cooking, I've got professionals who work for me. He knows how to make a hell of a gnocchi. He makes a great sauce. We know how to take care of that pork so it's tender and flavorful and well used because zero waste, so it's all being used. And then he gave me the flair of the egg, which to the customer, they don't even see it, but I know it's in there.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how we do all of our dishes. I did a vinegar pie recently. This one was one of mine. And I did a oh my goodness. Yeah, you'll have to edit that. This is me being tired and can't remember.
I haven't slept
Collard
24
greens. When collard greens, the liquor. Oh, okay. So I recently did a dish that was a pot liquor vinegar pie. Pot liquor is the liquid off-put from making collard greens and poke salad and whatever. And vinegar pie, of course, is that Depression era pie where you take vinegar, thicken it up, sweeten it, throw it in a pie shell.
Okay.
So I wanted to do a pot liquor vinegar pie. We took our pot liquor, turned it to vinegar, and then did that very traditional recipe. Served it with a collard green Pringle.
Super cool.
Because a Pringle, what's a Pringle? Well, it's just potato starch and liquid dehydrated and then they would bake it. We fry ours because, fried.
Mhm.
And so we did a collard green Pringle, collard green juice into that potato starch. That dish was created out of the concept of me wanting to tell the story of why we eat vinegar pies now.
Mm.
You can do vinegar pie anytime, but historically speaking, we do it coming out of winter. Why? Because in the fall, we canned all that fruit. Over the winter, we ate all that fruit, but we kept all the liquid in the jars. And this time of year, we sweeten it, thicken it, throw it in a pie shell, and we have vinegar pie. There are people right now saying, oh, no, apple cider pie, apple cider vinegar. Yes, but in the research that I see,
Mm-hmm.
that's what was happening that made it special. And part of that is I've never heard of that anywhere else. Because to me, people are like, well, what is Ozark cuisine and Ozark culture? I'm like, let's talk about what's not.
Yeah.
That helps define it.
Mm-hmm.
Same with plants, flora and fauna. I'm like, well, okay, here are the things we have. What don't we have? What do we have that no one else has? Those are the questions that really get to the defining of Ozark history and culture. And so I'm not saying it doesn't happen anywhere else, but I've never seen any other culture keep the liquid from their canning process, turn that to vinegar, and then throw it in the pie. They
Man.
dump it. It's waste.
Yeah.
Now, shoot, if modern times, I'm throwing it in a cocktail with some whiskey, but back then, that's maybe they were doing. I don't know.
Who knows? Yeah.
Yeah,
Throwing it into a moonshine maybe back then.
Yeah. So to me, that's how the dishes come into being. There's a kernel that ties to local and seasonal.
Mm-hmm.
I figure out what the story is, and then the guys are like, what does a modern diner want to eat?
Yeah.
What are some of those flora and fauna that you would be so amped to find as you're sourcing and foraging and all that kind of stuff, kind of by season?
Yeah. The golden chalice or whatever was the eel. I've been wanting that for 4 years, and we finally served it this past year, just a few months ago. And the only way we were able to do it is there's an eel farm in Maine. Like, well, there goes my local, but the story is so damn good. I've got to do it.
Mm-hmm.
As a forager, that's the core of everything I do. I live for my absolute favorite ingredient to forage is cattail, and within the cattail, because the whole thing's edible, the cattail pollen is my absolute number one.
Really?
Oh yeah.
How on earth do you get that and put that into a dish?
Well, so I am so enamored by cattail pollen and the smell of it. It's like a yeasty citrus.
Oh.
I gather about a quart a year, and I think it was last year, maybe the year before, they kind of blur, but I took a sample to the Museum of Scentology in Los Angeles because what she's able to do is get a chemical analysis done so you can recreate scents. I'm like, man, I want to have this smell like that could be our signature scent in the bathroom, or I didn't know, I didn't know what I was going to do with it. I just knew that very few people in the universe know that smell, but it's around all of us. And how cool is that to introduce people to something that I think is just so special? So I take it to this woman, like her job is scent. You could pick up anything and she would break it down and say, well, that's sandalwood and moss and whatever.
Wow.
And I gave her the jar and she said, I've never smelled anything like that.
I did it.
Yes.
I stumped the scentologist.
Yeah. I mean, this is stumping Ken Jenkins on Jeopardy. Is that his name? I don't watch Jeopardy, but yeah, it's the same idea. It's like, how cool is it that we have this special, unique ingredient? That said, there's hardly any flavor to it. It's
Okay.
it's the scent, and so when I use it, I'm using it in a way that that bouquet, that smell wafts off the dish.
Okay.
I have done cocktails where I put it with the cocktail, and it's I don't know what the scientific word is, but it floats. It won't ever absorb, and so you'll have this yellow powder on top of your drink, which is kind of annoying and gross on the mouth. So it's not something I encourage my staff to do, but you get that smell of yeasty citrus That's cool.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, when we talk flora, I could go on and on and on. I mean, this is my world. Coming back to Missouri, I'm again born and raised through high school, so 18 years, and then I moved off, and then I came back again just like 8 years ago. And I didn't remember pawpaw when I was a kid. How did I miss pawpaw?
Yeah.
And of course, pawpaw is one of my cash crops now, man. I pull in 200 pounds a day when it's in season because I want it to go year round here at the restaurant. Acorns are one of my biggest things. I'll put my acorn knowledge up against anyone, including Bo Brown down in Springfield area. You know, he's that big forager down there. And I only say that because acorns are such a cool story. Like, it's everywhere, but we don't eat them. And people are like, oh, they're toxic. They're not toxic. There's that tannic property that needs to be dealt with, and then you can eat them. And then they're nutritious, and they're everywhere. This year, I did a controlled study. Look at me being all geeky scientist
Look at
again.
you.
It's awesome.
Citizen scientist.
So I gathered 200 pounds of acorns. That's my quote every year. And I processed them all the same until the point of the leaching, the removing of the tannins. And then I did a control to make sure there's no cross-contamination in my 3 samples. So identical amounts, separated. And I did the old school method of boiling on the stovetop, which I don't recommend to people.
And this is to remove the tannins.
To remove the tannins, to make it palatable. I did the second technique, which is the one I teach people, which is the cold water leaching. Cover it with water, put it in the fridge overnight. Every morning, change out your water, do that for a week. And then I did what we do here in the restaurant. We have a vacuum chamber sealer, so you're not going to do this at home. But vacuum chamber sealers boil at a lower temperature, so I can get the benefit of the boil without introducing heat into the nut, which has those oils that go rancid. And so I've got the 3, and it's off at the lab right now. The question is, which is the most nutritionally beneficial way of processing the acorns?
Oh, cool.
It's going to be really cool, unless the results are null. It's all the same. They're like, whoa, it's the exact same thing. And then I've wasted $2,000 and all that time.
But good study, Rob.
Then you'll know.
but then we know.
Yeah.
But I know that's not going to be the case. I know that the hot water one is going to be removing valuable nutrients. The cold water is going to be the better one. My technique might be as good or better. I don't know yet.
With that, if you find that the nutrients have come out in the boiled water, would you then take that boiled water and then try to incorporate that into something else?
So yes and no. I mean, no, I wouldn't waste my time on that because that's the tannins.
That's what you're trying to get out.
Right. But I live for black walnut season, not the nut time in June.
When they're green.
Because I make nocino every year.
Ooh.
And nocino is a black walnut liqueur done when they're at their peak of greenness right before they start to turn dark and get hard because you have to cut them up, steep them in your liquor. We do a combination of Everclear and 100 proof vodka here. It steeps for 60 days more or less, depending on the year. And then it ages until Christmas. Christmas, you taste it, adjust it, and I've been doing this for 18 years, and I blend my vintages every year, and it's delicious. Why do we like it? Because there's that bitterness that comes from green walnuts, black walnuts, but when they're green. And I do think the geek in me would take that water and be like, oh, what if we concentrated and work it into a cocktail as the bittering agent? It could be cool. The reality is I'm dumping that stuff.
Yeah, too much time.
Yeah.
So you're cutting green walnuts and putting it in Everclear and vodka.
Yeah.
Just the outside? Just the kind of the fleshy?
The whole thing. You just take it, quarter it, throw it in your thing. I do a 5-gallon bucket.
Never heard of that. That's amazing.
Oh my goodness. No. This is like, no.
You're going to break your heart.
Oh, no, because this is something that anyone can do.
Yeah.
It's so easy. Just Google nocino, recipe nocino. There's 100 of them out there. They're all good enough. And then after you've done it the first year, you start to adjust.
Yeah.
Because most people sweeten it later. I sweeten at the beginning. and they're infinitely adjustable. So, what sugar are you sweetening with? What spices and herbs are you putting in there? Mine is orange peel, cinnamon stick, black pepper, spice bush. And when I can find local ginger, I'll throw local ginger in.
Mhm.
But everyone's got their own mix.
Right.
It's easy.
That is so
That's
cool.
cool.
Throw it in the closet and forget about it until Christmas and then enjoy it.
Yeah.
And what are you making with the acorns or the acorns, as I like to call them?
Yeah.
in Arkansas, but
Everything. I mean, we serve
Breads
so much. Yeah, we do breads. On our current menu, I have an acorn financier. Financier is it's a muffin, but it's a rich brown butter bread, and because it's financier, it's fancy, but it's ultimately just a muffin. I do acorn shortbread. We're doing gooey butter cake for our St. Louis crowd here. That's an acorn flour gooey butter cake. We have an acorn miso creme brulee right now, so we make acorn miso every year. It's one of our favorite misos. We make a bunch of misos and turned it into a creme brulee, so it's sweet and salty and umami. That's been a big hit. We bring in indigenous chefs from time to time to do guest chefing.
Okay.
And we brought Bradley Dry. Bradley is Cherokee, and he was the chef for the TV show Reservation Dogs, which is a great show. If anyone watched it, he loves to tell the story how he made the meat pies on episode 1. And he's like, I had to make 300 meat pies.
Oh my goodness.
And so when he came here, he introduced us to a dish called Connoley. And I know there's different pronunciations, so don't write in on that one. We know there are different pronunciations. But to him, it's Connoley, and Connoley is often hickory nut and acorn and then whatever base nut, so whether it's pecan or whatever.
Gotcha.
You know, the other, I'm going to say one more ingredient because I didn't get any this year, and I was really bummed. I've had a generous person send me chinkapin chestnuts every year for the past 4 years until this year.
Yeah.
I only get a few cups of it, but boy, do I make it stretch. And it's, for me, not to make the case for me getting more, but it's important because I can tell that story of why they disappeared, how they're coming back, the initiative behind it.
Absolutely.
And again, doing that through food is a great way of doing
It
it.
is an excellent way to do it. I'll ask you one last thing, and then I'll let you get back to work because I know you got a lot to do for your crowd tonight. Something that a lot of people do in the Ozarks as far as going out and foraging and kind of a hero, a celebrity in the foraging world is the morel mushroom.
Yeah.
People love it, right? It's a craze. People go out there and they try to find these things. For you, I want to ask you, if you can, what is your absolute favorite way to prepare a morel mushroom?
It's funny because morels are fine, whatever. There are better mushrooms out there.
Yeah.
Give me a big basket of chanterelles any day. But anyway, I'll play your game. Oh, geez, we've done so many different things.
I'm sure you're
I'm
trying to
gonna-
limit it down from like 100 ways.
Yeah, I'm going to tell you, I'm not going to give you anything deep fried, battered, none of that stuff. That's rookie hour. Of course, sauteed with butter and garlic is classic, and it's going to be a crowd pleaser, of course. I think my favorite and most memorable is we had some late season ones that were getting a little buggy, and we dehydrated, which to me allowed it to concentrate the flavor. And then we rehydrated it in a simple syrup, 50-50 water, sugar, ultimately infusing the mushroom with the syrup, but then infusing the syrup. The syrup then got sent up to the bar to be worked into drinks.
Okay.
And then we dehydrated the morel again.
Oh my goodness.
Now it's candied. Okay.
Ah.
We took that and worked it into an ice cream, and it was a persimmon fruit ice cream. So
No way.
we had the persimmon ice cream with the flecks of the candied morel. That was pretty cool.
Amazing. Oh, I love it. I'm gonna have to try that this spring.
It's a few steps, right?
Yeah.
This is why you go to restaurants instead of people are like, I could do that at home. Yeah, you could, but you won't.
I'm a lot of stuff.
Excited for you to explain to your wife why you're dehydrating bear jerky in 1 month and candied morels in another. And you're like, this is just where we're at now,
She'll
babe.
just have to go with it.
We do.
She'll just have to go with it. Oh man. Well, Rob, we really appreciate your time, and it's been fun hanging out here and learning from you about kind of exploring that idea again around Ozarks culture and cuisine and food and how it ties in, using historic evidence and knowledge that we have, making it relevant for the contemporary Ozarks. I'm really appreciative of your time.
Yeah, well, any chance I get to tell the story, I jump on it, and it goes back to what I said at the very beginning. I think the Ozarks have been neglected and dismissed, and we know academically why that happened, and I think it's a shame. And so we're doing our part to tell a more complete story, a different story that engages the masses, because we're doing it through food.
Yeah, absolutely.
I do have one more question for you. Are we going to see you at the Squirrel Cook-Off again this September?
If Joe invites me, I absolutely would love to.
All right.
Because you know what I brought to the table is when they served us that squirrel filet mignon.
Mm-hmm.
And everyone's like, what the hell? I'm like, oh, come on, guys. I know how they did that. Because they took all that squirrel meat, tossed in transglutamus, which is a meat glue, put in some saran and made that log, and then wrapped it in the bacon. That's how we got a 3-inch diameter squirrel filet mignon. I know what you did there.
I'm on to you.
And it was okay, but because you did that, you dried out your meats.
Yeah, that one was...
And that's why it wasn't our favorites.
That's right.
And that's good.
Awesome. Well, we hope to see you then. And again, we appreciate you coming on the show.